Welcome to Tête-à-Tête, Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies. I'm Jonathan Slater, the host of this podcast. Tête-à-Tête, Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies is a production of Canadian Jewish Studies, Études, juives canadiennes, an interdisciplinary, peer-reviewed journal published by the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies and devoted to original scholarship that illuminates any and all aspects of the Canadian Jewish experience. My guest today on Tête-à-Tête, Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies, is Professor Norman Ravvin, author of City, Writer, Conference, a Chava Rosenfarb Conference, Łódź, Poland, October 2023. Originally from Calgary, Norm Ravvin is an award-winning fiction and nonfiction writer. He is the author of Who Gets In? An Immigration Story, released by University of Regina Press in 2023. Norm's other works include The Girl Who Stole Everything, Hidden Canada, an Intimate Travelogue, Sex, Skyscrapers, and Standard Yiddish, and The House of Words, Jewish Writing, Identity, and Memory. He teaches in the Department of Religions and Cultures at Concordia University in Montreal, where he led the university's Institute for Canadian Jewish Studies for 15 years. Norm currently is president of the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies. Norm, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Tête-à-Tête, Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies.
Jonathan, thanks. It's fun to be here.
Well, I'm glad that we have a chance to talk. You and I have known each other for not a long while, but a while. So I want to clear the air because people are going to be noticing this and saying things when they listen to the podcast. So before we get into your reflection, pronunciation, okay? I've learned to pronounce the name of the city that you visited last year as Łódź. And a lot of scholars I know pronounce it Łódź. However, when you and I have talked in preparation for this podcast, your pronunciation was different. So you want to make the case
Sure.
for your pronunciation?
No, well, it's straightforward, and we'll both use our own, and that's a good arrangement. But anyone who arrives at this material via Yiddish, which I do to some degree, will pronounce cities and other words with the Yiddish pronunciation. So, for instance, my family's background is connected with a place called Malava in Yiddish, which the Poles resolutely call Mława. And in this case, too, in Yiddish, Łódź is Łódź. And you'll hear other people who are appreciative of Yiddish say it the same way. So we'll contrast each other, I guess.
Right. We'll each take a side. We'll take a side in the not the pronunciation wars, but the pronunciation stand.
Sure.
So where I'd like to start, Norm, now that we've gotten the pronunciation thing out of the way, is how you came by this. This is just a little over a year ago. You were in Poland, and how you came by picking up an invitation to this or inviting yourself, and tell a little bit more about because your reflection is more of a in medias res. You know, you drop us into what were the circumstances that led you to be in Poland in October 2023 for the Chava Rosenfarb Conference?
So it's nice to think about, and I'm sort of an idiosyncratic player on these fronts, in that in recent decade and more, I try to get to Poland every year, but that opportunity fell apart during COVID, of course. But then this popped up, in circles that I follow. So I had been to Łódź before, and I have good contacts and friends there. So I like to follow what's going on at the university. And at the same time, I had the opportunity for a leave. So I was able to be away from Montreal for longer than I usually would be. And then I think it would have been via Goldie Morgenthaler, the daughter of Chava Rosenfarb, that the news of the conference came my way, or through some other kind of neat circle in writerly or academic contexts. So the idea on my part was to certainly try them out with a paper, which is what I did. I wasn't an invitee. I just put the paper in as the bulk of the rest of the people did. And then I connected the hoped for conference visit with a stay in different parts of Poland. So I was there about 3 weeks and it all worked out. So I had my leave. I had some time in Warsaw. I went to our ancestral places. And then I spent a couple of weeks in Łódź, where I also taught at the university through a colleague, and then made my way over to conference when it showed up. And it was kind of a nice mixed bag. So that was an unusual set of possibilities that all played out well for me in the fall.
That's fascinating. So you spent considerable time there, it sounds like. It wasn't just sort of dropping in for this conference. You had other
No,
things
yeah,
that were occupying your time, and
yeah.
it sounds very productive.
Yeah. I was on the train back and forth, and it took a little bit of thought as to where to start and in what way to bring Warsaw into the picture. And then I was both in Lodz, left it, came back. So it was just one of those good sort of rambling kind of visits, different parts of the country. Poland's very easy to travel around by train and inexpensive. And I sort of have the hang of it. And it was just overall all nice, good opportunity.
That sounds terrific. And, I was feeling a bit envious reading the reflection because, first of all, you write so very well, and the texture of your trip was so much in evidence through your writing. And on one level, it was a travel log. It was it is a very serious reflection of your experience there. This a metaphor that you use when talking about your experience, your perception of what you were experiencing, walking around the city, looking at the various layers. You use this term palimpsest, which I love that as a metaphor, this notion of eras layering one on top of the other, where you can almost see what's underneath. So, could you talk a little bit more about your? It's not just a visual experience, it was a whole sensorial experience based upon what I read of what you were seeing in Watch. What was your perception?
Sure. So this, of course, comes from my willingness to walk everywhere, and we were also riding around in cabs because, as you asked, I had more time there than some of the others. I was around the city for a longer period this time, and having visited it before, I had a kind of an orientation and a sort of a sense of what I wanted to see. And I think too, the trick is to walk by yourself so that you're not trying to be a good conversationalist or catch up with people you want to do that too. But so you'll only notice the kinds of things or take advantage of the kinds of things that you're highlighting in my piece if you take a nice hour and a half walk on your way from where you're staying up to some other fascinating part of the city. And then, really, on the way, poke your nose in things, go through these kind of doorways and caravanseries that older buildings allow, and you go into the back courtyards of tenement buildings. And the thing about the city is that, unlike Warsaw, which everyone knows was destroyed during the Second World War, Lodz was not. And also, it's not an old city like Krakow. So you're not walking around looking at wonderful old churches and squares and such. So I think of it as a kind of an analogy to my own hometown, Calgary, which doesn't work in the same way in that they've erased all their history there, or a lot of their history. But it's not very old cities. So you can kind of you can understand what you're looking at architecturally. You don't have to be an architectural specialist. And you can take in the things you recognize that are, either late 19th century, there's some stuff, there's early 20th century. Then there's the things that you can connect with Jewish life. So special kinds of buildings where, Jews would have had homes and buildings, and then Soviet style stuff. So my piece looks for all those textures. And I think there could be ways to go through the city and hate it and think it looks upside down and strange. But there's other things going on too in these last years. That is, they've had some big EU money come in, and also the Polish economy has been doing better. So they're redesigning things, and I'm actually looking at just the way they're redoing their sidewalks and the way they put flowers near that, and the way the parks are being rethought. So there's another kind of urban design process going on in the city that's immediate, really contemporary. So it's all these possibilities. You have to be interested. You have to take the time. And then you also have to write them down as soon as you take a look at them so you don't forget about them all.
And of course, you have these wonderful photos included in your reflection, which our listeners, when they go in to read your reflection online, can see these photos online. You took those photos yourself, I imagine.
Yeah, so more idiosyncrasy. I travel with a film camera, which, increasingly feels bulky, and you wonder why you have it over your shoulder. But I think the outcome in this case was good. And I didn't take so many photographs, but the ones that the journal editor chose, they're big format, and they really catch the contrasts, modern and older in the city. And they're generally not people photographs. There's a few of groups, but they're more about the texture, the kind of things you're asking about, of streetscapes.
Yeah, they're wonderful photos because in a way they don't seem, how should I say, they don't seem rehearsed.
Hmm.
They're a perfect complement
Hmm.
to the reflection. One photo that struck me, Norm, was the sukkah. That
Yeah, yeah,
that sukkah that sort of seems suspended in space
yeah.
on the side of this building.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen anything like
So
that.
that was new to me too. So some of the other things are things I'd seen before. So on your way to that, so that's there's two things to comment on. Some of the things I'm photographing there, I have photographed previously. So I'm
Right.
I'm actually not doing that when I stand there. I don't feel like I'm a tourist. I feel like I belong there, and I'm back, and oh, that building looks just the same as it did 4 or 5 years ago. And in this case, though, it was a guide who pointed us to that remarkable two-level sukkah, I think,
Yeah.
wooden,
Yeah.
beautiful. The
Amazing.
craftsmanship of it
Amazing structure.
still evident on
Yeah.
the back of a substantial kind of villa type tenement that's just off Piotrkowska, which is the main drag of the city. But I had never seen such a thing and probably wouldn't have thought about it when I passed. So it was a case where you did need the person to point it out. And then the thing that's on your mind as you look up at it is wonder what they're doing with it now. So it was this, Jewish seasonal structure that must have had some other kind of potential when it wasn't the holiday, but then who's living in there and what's going on in the two sukkahs that they could be,
Right, because it
using.
looks permanent. It doesn't
Mhm.
look like a typical temporary structure that
No,
a sukkah should be. It
yeah.
has its own life. It has its own being, and it's quite fascinating.
So ethnographically, let's say maybe it's something really special to the location, to the city, to the infrastructure, everything about it. But someone else might tell us, no, you could find those in X, Y, and Z place. But yeah, it really was a great discovery.
That's interesting. And that leads me to a question about, traces of Jewish life in a place like Łódź, because you have this sukkah, but you've also it's not the main theme of your reflection, but you do allude to what Jewish life had been in Łódź. What are your impressions? What did you come away with? And since you've been there before, obviously your analysis is probably deeper than if you were just sort of parachuting in there for a quick trip as a tourist. So can
Right.
you share some of your thoughts on
Sure.
that?
So the conference had lots of opportunities for the conference goers, and they took them on tours. And I went on one walking tour associated with Chava Rosenfarb's locations. So we saw some buildings associated with her, and I have a photograph of one of them in the mix. And then other kinds of sites that were associated with Jewish schools, this kind of thing I hadn't been aware of, and you need a specialist to show you. They also took them on tours that I had done before, so I didn't repeat them this time out. So there's just a remarkable extant Jewish cemetery in the city on kind of a suburban outskirts, not very far out. And they took a good guide there, and they looked around. That's a wonderful site for recognizing the variety of life before the war among Łódź Jews, because of it's back to same details, the variety of gravestones, very traditional ones that you can read for their traditional markings, and then very modern Art Nouveau ones, beautiful stuff. So the cemetery is sad and it's beautiful, and it's kind of a sign of the variety of pre-war life. This time too, I didn't go on the walking tour. They brought people onto what remains of the ghetto. So there's lots of structures that are standing, and the kind of surround of the ghetto to some degree can be re-entered, and a good guide will help you with that. So these are typical things that visitors will do. And of course, I wanted to do them in the past, and this time didn't feel I needed it. Also, on a previous visit, I was in a walk-up active kind of Friday night service among a certain small group of locals who were keeping the Sabbath and dinner and singing songs, with a kind of a leadership associated with the eve of the Sabbath. So that too was something from before that I didn't do again. But then I have to say that I do have colleagues there with Jewish origins, as they sometimes say in Poland. So I don't have the feeling that I'm walking in a place without Jews, though of course the place has been emptied of its Jews by the Germans. But I have a certain feeling of continuity when I'm there, but maybe I'm in a lucky situation for that. And then, of course, the conference was unusual because all these Jews converged from all over the world. But that seemed also very kind of familiar to me because of other conferences I've gone to in Poland. So different people would really feel differently. And of course, I enter that territory in the piece that you're helping me promote and talk about and get people to take a look at. And that has to do with the different way that visiting Jews experience a place like Łódź. And that variety is interesting. So there I'm a kind of also a peculiar responder.
That leads me actually to two further questions, because you bring up the nature of, for lack of a better term, Jewish life in a place like Łódź, and you talk about colleagues, and you talk about having on a previous trip been taking part in an Erev Shabbat gathering. But generally, the tone seems to be, when you read about Poland, especially the previous political administration in Poland that's just been replaced, that the Poles' relationship with the Shoah, with the Holocaust, seems to be somewhat fraught. It's created a lot of tension, especially between Poland and the diaspora. What was your sense of that? Since I'm sure that you were in contact with Poles, non-Jewish Poles. What was your sense of what was going on, and did you feel that the relationship was somehow fraught?
So you mean at that fall date a little more than a year ago?
Last
Yeah.
year. Yeah. What was
Yeah.
your
So
what was your sense of things?
so there's too much to say about that, but so we lucked out. Well, I lucked out. I was there during the election, so I was walking in Warsaw as the young people, as I saw these lineups, were lining up to vote out that terrible government that they had for too long a period of time. And I was also visiting with some of these people, and they're generally the people you'd want to meet. So they're not Jews, but they're involved in heritage, or they're involved in academia, or they're museum people. All kinds of interesting work that often points in a direction that might relate to a Jewish past or Jewish culture. And they were, of course, very hopeful that that election would work out the way it did, and so it goes. It was at the opposite of what happened in the United States recently. The right people came into power, and everyone takes a breath. So that was one thing in the background of my visit. Then, of course, when we're at the conference, everyone's talking about the kinds of things and responding to the kinds of things that you've just asked about. And I don't think they were as cued to the election as I was, maybe because I'd been in the city and in the country a little bit longer. And also, there is a tendency among Canadians, Americans who don't visit Poland often or are just at a conference for kind of a special reason, to bring with them varieties of baggage. And that stuff doesn't go away, and doesn't matter how successful their visit is or how excellent the management of the conference is, and the recognition that somebody like Chava Rosenfarb has been named the personality of the city for the year. All these things are going to hit them in the face, and yet they carry the baggage that they have, and that's a complex territory that we talk about that baggage as we ride around in cabs or sit at dinner. And I say things that people, you could see, they kind of lean back and they think, haven't heard that before. So there's just such different ways of living with this stuff when Jews visit Poland.
Right. So who were the people at the conference? Can you paint a picture of, were they all scholars, or was it a mix of different professions, or was it mostly scholars who were interested in the life and work of Chava
Yeah.
Rosenfarb?
So it was a good mix. The thing I'd say first, I'm looking at the schedule as we talk, is that it had a real international flavor. So they really did have a variety of Europeans. They had a variety of North Americans. They had the Canadian contingent who know about Rosenfarb sometimes from Montreal. They had graduate students. They had faculty. They had the family that is still accessible. And Rosenfarb has relatives in Toronto, and she has most importantly, her daughter, who's now based mostly in Lethbridge, but also in Toronto. That's Goldie Morgenthaler. So you're right that, at a conference like this, there were academics, there were graduate students, there were translators. That was an important slice or slant of what's going on here, because people are translating Rosenfarb into different languages. And the organizers of the conference, a special kind of Center for Jewish Culture and Research, have translated the bulk of her novels into Polish. So young translators and more established translators. And then they brought a bunch of cultural activities along too. So there was musicians and there was performers. And you didn't necessarily interact with those people personally because they were doing their thing on the stage, but maybe others had the opportunity to talk to the singers or the musicians. I didn't. I just was able to see those performances. So it's quite a nice breadth of people involved.
Well, we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the life and works of Chava Rosenfarb. I'm talking today on tete-a-tete conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies with Professor Norman Ravvin. Norm's reflection on this conference can be found online. We're going to take a little break now, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Norm Ravvin.
Hey there, I'm Josh Tapper, managing editor of the journal Canadian Jewish Studies and co-vice president of the journal's parent organization, the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies. Before we get back to Jonathan and Norm, I want to share a bit about the ACJS, which, if you didn't already know, is the world's leading organization dedicated to advancing public knowledge on the Jewish experience in Canada. We've been in business for just about half a century, a time in which our diverse and multidisciplinary community of scholars, archivists, artists, students, and Jewish community leaders have helped ensure that all Canadians have access to and can engage with the amazing, colorful tapestry of Canada's Jewish culture, heritage, and history. This is an incredibly exciting time at the ACJS. In addition to the programs and projects we've always excelled at, like our annual Scholars Conference, which, by the way, is upcoming in Ottawa from May 25th to 27th if you're in the area, and our journal, which will publish its 40th volume in May 2025, we're taking a big step forward with a variety of other initiatives, like a repository for past and future social science research on Canadian Jewry, so communal policymakers and leaders have access to data that will drive their decision-making about the future of Jewish life in Canada, like a literary journal for fiction and poetry by Canadian Jewish authors, like a memoir writing project that will collect and publish life stories of Jewish Canadians from all walks of life. And that's just scratching the surface. There are many ways for you to follow along and engage with our work, and we hope you'll do so. Scroll down to the show notes for links to the association's website and the journal, where you can read everything we've ever published entirely for free. Sign up for our newsletter, where we'll keep you informed about what we've got going on and feature exclusive content that takes you deeper into the world of Canadian Jewish studies. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. We hope you'll join us on this important journey to increase awareness, understanding, and appreciation of the Jewish experience in Canada across time and space. And now, back to the show.
I'm Jonathan Slater, host of Tête-à-Tête, Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies. I've been talking with Norm about his impressions of this conference. I wanted to ask you a little bit more, if you can go into a little bit more detail about the life and works of Chava Rosenfarb. Who was she? Why should we be interested in her work? Why are you interested in her work? So tell us a little bit more about this person. Who is Chava Rosenfarb, and why is she important to Jewish studies, Canadian Jewish studies in particular?
Sure. So when we start to plan this, I tried to remember how I first found Chava's work, and I think it was in Yiddish. So that's a quirky thing, because my mom, so sorry to mention, I have to mention my mom, had a collection of Yiddish Canadian writing that she'd bought at a book fair in Calgary. In it was a short story by Chava called the Greenhorn. And it's become, I think, the most anthologized short piece. It's a terrific short story, really worth checking out, and it appears in a variety of anthologies in different translations, actually, and in the best case by Goldie Morgenthaler. So there you have the first my first encounter with her in Yiddish. And then by the time I was working on Holocaust literature at the University of Toronto, working on a variety of writers for my PhD work, I certainly was aware of the overwhelming presence of male writers, and even at that early stage in the early 90s, I recognized I should vary that to some degree. And then it just seemed great that I could put it, not just answer that challenge, but put a Yiddish writer in. So when I set my list of writers up for the thesis, in went her really impressive and large novel of pre-war and wartime Łódź called The Tree of Life. So alongside Philip Roth and Saul Bellow and Leonard Cohen and A.M. Klein, I did a chapter on her. And one of my interests then was translation. So I don't usually think of myself as being ahead of any game, but I was interested in what had happened to the book when they moved it into English, and they did a big project based in Australia to bring it out in English. And I read it in English and then looked at the Yiddish and saw a lot of differences. And I never actually resolved too clearly what had happened in translation, but it was very interesting to see what had happened to the book as it got moved into English. And I did contact Goldie at that time. So the thesis work put me into that book, The Tree of Life. That's the one people should take a look at if they're willing to take some time, because it really does tell the pre-war story through a personality kind of like the author, and it places that young woman in the city in Jewish context, and the rich and the poor. She's a kind Rosenfarb is in that book. She's a kind of a Dickensian sort of, full scale, everything detailed. The rooms come to life, the streets, the activity in the city, and then the wartime in the ghetto is detailed with such intense care. So she supplied all these different things for me. And then having it done by a Yiddish writer, it's always been my goal. I mean, I never did Yiddish studies properly or academically, but if I could bring Yiddish into my scholarly work and make some kind of movement around it, I was happy. So all these things point toward a sort of an ongoing interest in her, and I continue to teach her. I generally only teach a short story or two. The novels are too large. You can't, I don't know that my students would be able to contend with them. And then luckily, too, I've stayed in contact with her daughter, Goldie, and their having been in Alberta allowed me to visit them at one point. So I was in Calgary for something, and I took the car down to Lethbridge, and I saw Chava in her adopted home in Lethbridge, and interviewed her there and drove back. And so my interactions with the family, and then more later with Goldie, they've sort of continued in nice personal ways as well as in scholarly ways.
Well, I want to read something from your reflection. There's a paragraph that struck me. And what struck me about this paragraph is that to you, this conference and also the scholarly work on Chava Rosenfarb appears, at least in my mind, for you to be a mission. So let me read this paragraph. If one were to make a documentary film that would capture the outcomes of Chava Rosenfarb and Jewish female writers of the 20th century, the greatest and most pressing challenge would be to convey this range of emotions, responses, and judgments regarding the outcome of a revival of interest in Rosenfarb in Poland, and especially in Łódź. These issues may not reverberate strongly in Montreal, New York, or Stockholm, but those of us who attended the conference bring these issues home. They lurk in the photographs we took, in things we'll tell friends and family, and one would hope in what we write or make in response to what we saw and heard. I was very moved by this paragraph, and I found it very profound and promising.
Hmm.
There's a lot of promise in that. So if you could react to your own words there, but also what I want to ask you, I'm going to be sneaky here, Norm, is what's next? This seems to intimate something else
Right.
in the future dealing with Chava Rosenfarb. So your impressions about what you wrote here, and also what does this foreshadow?
Right. So, in the first case, the question of what that paragraph was meant to contain or contend with. I mean, as I sat in a few of the panels, listening to people talk about her and other writers too, female writers, and also translation, I did think, oh, for the first time, I'm watching the canon shifting. So, literary people are interested in a canon. Other people think, I guess, too, about canonical kinds of lists and the dominance of certain writers or a musical canon. And I thought, oh, if I was reporting on this, if I had the great opportunity to make a documentary film, this is happening. And I think that's a big story. And Goldie Morgenthaler tells it in some of the things that she's written about her activities, and her own activities motivated it to a large degree. So, yeah, the writer moving to the fore. She's moving to the fore in a contemporary context among people who are younger than myself. And she's moving to the fore in different languages because the translators are making this, heroic effort to bring her into these other cultural landscapes. So it was just a very neat recognition. And these things happen for all kinds of reasons. So I'm interested in canon, and for the people in Łódź, especially the organizers of the conference and the Marek Edelman Center's management and sort of leadership, it puts Łódź on the map too, because the novels they're just centered on the city in such a wonderful way. So it reinserts the Jewishness, which has, to the largest amount, aside from tourism and commemoration, disappeared, and then it brings it to life in this kind of terrific novelistic way. So canon in the literary context, canon in the translating context, and then also the city is sort of remarking itself. So that too comes up, and I mentioned it in the piece because they named a little passage after Rosenfarb. So the Poles are actually so much more attentive to their literary heritage than we are. So they're really very idealistic and sophisticated on this front. So it's not surprising, but the choice of the street and all this kind of stuff was of interest too. And then that got a lot of press. and the family and some of the conference goers went and got photographed near it. So marking the city in this way. So your next question, what's next? So first time you ask me a question, I don't know the answer to that one. But the people at the Merrick Edelman Center, if you want to follow their website, they're really so busy there. They're doing so much stuff associated with Holocaust commemoration and education and things in the city itself, and then bringing people to them. I suspect Rosenfarb's not going to go away in their view. So that's the place to look. And I have to say that in advance of talking to you, I didn't go back and look at the website and see what's up next, but that's what I need to do. And then there'd be other answers too. But so I can't do as well as I should for that question.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I didn't want to put you on the spot.
Sure.
My guest today on Tête-à-Tête Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies has been Professor Norm Ravvin. Norm, I wanted to thank you again for a very engaging conversation today. And the reflection really got me thinking. And not only that, but I want to go to Poland now. I want to just get on the plane and
I'm
go
your
to
ambassador. I'm your ambassador.
Thank you again, Norm. Really
Yeah.
appreciate your time with me today. I'm Jonathan Slater, your host of Tête-à-Tête Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies. Thanks for listening to the show today, and special thanks to our guest today, Norm Ravvin. This episode of Tête-à-Tête Conversations in Canadian Jewish Studies was produced and edited by Michelle Chang in Toronto. Our music is provided by Jordy Koffman. Our executive producers are Joshua Tapper and David Koffman. Tête-à-Tête is a podcast from the Association for Canadian Jewish Studies. You can find out more about the ACJS by checking out our website, www.acjs-aejc.ca. We're grateful to our supporters, the Israel and Golda Koshitsky Center for Jewish Studies at York University, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council's Aid for Scholarly Journals program, and the J. Richard Schiff Chair for the Study of Canadian Jewry. In the show notes, you can find a transcript of our show today, as well as a link to Norm Ravvin's article in Volume 39 of Canadian Jewish Studies, his article entitled City Writer Conference, a Chava Rosenfarb Conference in Łódź, Poland, October 2023. We'd love it if you could share, like, and rate our podcast. You're also invited to add your email to the ACJS's occasional newsletter or support the ACJS's amazing work by following links in the show notes. If you have comments or thoughts about this or any other of our podcasts, feel free to email us at cjeditor, that's cjeditor at yorku.ca, yorku.ca. Come back and join us for another conversation.